Guys, while I was away, some really interesting news broke that I think is very important to value investors. Of course, that was this whole Bud Light situation. And so I want to cover it from the perspective of a value investor and how this really changes the game. And so as you guys smash that like button, let me run that intro. What's up, guys? And I was fascinated by this whole situation because I think it really sort of changes the way that we as value investors need to approach companies, especially companies that may try and polarize their brand in an effort to stand out. And so there, obviously could be a risk in doing that. Now, I don't think that Bud Light purposely tried to do that. I think they accidentally fell into this sort of like polarized marketplace and they're suffering the results as a result of it. And so let's dive right into exactly what happened and what the implication is for investors going forward. And I'll start with what happened. So you guys may not realize, but two executives have actually been put on leave at Bud Light. And so, I only thought it was the one, but it looks like the boss of the person who came out and publicly spoke about this has also been put on leave. And so, as evidenced by Bud Light, there are consequences for purposely or, accidentally engaging in a polarized political climate with your corporate messaging. Even, like I said, if it was by accident, which I think in Bud Light's case, it was. And here's a marketing executive over at Bud Light that got all of the attention, Alyssas. I think, she's a super intelligent person. She's definitely got a great pedigree. I think she's got a background at Harvard, and then she went to Wharton as well. She's a top 40 under 40 in the advertising industry. So like very, very smart, hardworking person. And I think where she sort of made the mistake is that she mentioned that she went on a podcast and she mentioned that there was a fratty and out of touch humor in the brand's messaging, which was a hangover from past campaigns. The previous approach did not necessarily appeal to women and young people, and I think she was right in my opinion. So in order to revive the declining brand, her approach was to appeal to a younger audience. But I think where she made the mistake was not understanding how polarizing the particular influencer was that she decided to go with. Now, here's the thing. It's not like Bud Light doesn't partner with many influencers. It just so happens that this particular influencer was very polarizing to her current base. And so, I think one of the errors in judgment here was, it was sort of the thinking of the more influencers that we get in different areas of the internet or whatever, the more people will appeal to. However, I don't think the thought was made of, can one particular influencer alienate another part of our consumer base? And so I don't think that companies have really been thinking about that. I don't know. I don't work in advertising, but I don't think they really have been thinking about that, especially these consumer brand companies. I think the idea is just to go out and appeal to as many groups as possible. But now, I think one of the changes is that anytime you bring on an influencer, you're going to have to think about how do other groups that we're also trying to appeal to both feel about this particular influencer. And I think that's the direction that they're going to have to go in the future. Now, in that previous screen, I just mentioned the remarks that she made, which I believe were about the brand's marketing efforts. However, I think because people were irked about the particular influencer that Bud Light decided to go with, I think that they misinterpreted what she was trying to say about the brand and they interpreted it towards them. And this is what I mean. So here's a particular individual responding to someone defending Alyssa on LinkedIn. And, I made a decision to not show his name because it really doesn't matter. But, this is what he said. He said that she called her base market out of touch frat boys. Who in their right mind gets online and calls their current brand user out of touch frat boys? You should set aside all the political agenda and identity politics of the conversation. And so here's where I would push back a little bit. I think, in full honesty, I don't think she actually called the current consumer base fratty. It sounded to me like she was referring to the previous marketing campaigns as fratty. And I'm going to show you exactly what her comments were in the next slide. But, I think the right move here would have been to come out and provide some clarification. I try and give people the benefit of the doubt because I've definitely been misinterpreted many times just from being a YouTuber. And so I understand how people can misinterpret you. And so it's just important to get in front of that and just provide clarification. At least, with YouTube, I have the comment section. So if I, say something that was interpreted incorrectly, I could always just, write a note and pin the comment or something. She doesn't really have access to that. And so she would really have to come out and provide clarification. And so I really do think her heart was in the right place. She was just trying to revive the brand and accidentally stepped into a political landmine. That's kind of the way that I'm thinking about it, but I want to know what you guys think about it. And so here's her quote: "Representation is sort of the heart of evolution. You've got to see people who reflect you in your work. And we had this hangover. I mean, Bud Light had been kind of a brand of fratty, kind of out of touch humor, and it was really important that we had another approach." And so here's where I believe that, she wasn't actually insulting the consumer base. She was trying to describe the type of humor that the brand went with. It was fratty, sort of like out of touch humor, at least in her opinion. And I guess what she's not doing here is she's not saying that the consumer base, look, this fratty out of touch humor might appeal to a certain audience of the consumer base, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are fratty and out of touch. You see what I'm trying to say there? And I think that was how I interpreted this, but I might be wrong. So I want you guys to let me know what you think. Am I interpreting this correctly, or did she actually call her consumers fratty and out of touch? And so Warren Buffett actually spoke about the increased polarization in America, and you can see that in '94 people were closer to the middle, so they were pretty much voting relatively in line with one another. There might be some small differences, and then in 2017 you can see that the polarization increased considerably, and I think post-COVID is probably even worse, or people are more divided. And I sort of broke these out into the pre-internet, post-internet ages, and I think what's happening is that the internet has provided people with echo chambers, and the result is they are less and less exposed to other perspectives. And so what does this mean? Well, as a marketer, you sort of have to understand this and decide, is your brand going to try to appeal to both sides, or is your brand going to be polarized and appeal to one side? And you really have to make a conscious position of that, and then every sort of like downstream decision you're making sort of has to go in line with that. Now, I'm not saying that it makes zero sense to be polarized. There are certain companies that focus on polarization. For example, the difference between CNN and Fox, they focus on completely different audiences, and it works on YouTube. Even in the finance space, there's a polarization. There's people that are specifically focused on index investing, and then there's people that are specifically focused on individual stock picking. And so you can see this level of polarization even in our own YouTube space. And so you can see that there are some marketers out there that focus on actually going in the polarized direction. You would think that, in order to sell as much product or services to as many people as possible, you'd want to not be polarized. But there are some marketers out there who believe that going the opposite way is the way to help your brand stand out from the crowd. And so, there's lots of these types of articles. I've even seen many in the Harvard Business Review. And so it's all out there. So what are they really trying to go after here? And it really comes down to the digital marketing world. People are inundated with stimuli. And so average is boring, and polarized can actually be spun into something that's interesting. And so essentially what they're trying to say is that the more, and this is Russell Brunson, he actually created there was like a click funnel book that he wrote. I read that like years ago, and he mentions that the more away from average something gets, the more attention and following that something earns. And so here you're not polarized at all, and so you're just not getting any attention. But the further to the right or the further to the left you go, you're I guess a standard deviation away from what's considered average, not like right or left politically, but more just like a standard deviation, the more attention you're likely going to get. And effectively, Tony Robbins calls that the pattern disruptor. Everybody's kind of right here in the middle, and so if you're outside of the norm, you're gonna get the attention. And so a pattern disruptor is an unusual or new way of thinking, often forced onto the subject, that shifts their paradigm about how they believe in the world by presenting new or compelling reasons to believe in it. But it's not all rainbows, as evidenced by Bud Light's sales decline of 17% in the week of April 15th, as stated by Bump Williams Consulting Group. And so as shown with the recent events, Budweiser becoming polarized can actually backfire fire like it has. And so, being polarized and getting more attention doesn't necessarily always mean that you're going to get more sales. And so effectively, you're kind of playing with fire here, and you have to be very careful. This could be the best decision or the worst decision for your brand. And I just don't think a lot of companies are comfortable going in that direction. I think as investors, we have to be more cognizant of this now that this has happened. And at least I personally, for my portfolio, will probably stay away from companies that are moving in that sort of like polarized direction. Although it could be a viable strategy and I don't want to blame them for it, it may just not necessarily be something that I'm comfortable with for my portfolio. I don't want to take huge losses for a brand deteriorating by taking a misstep in this environment. And essentially what it comes down to is predictability. I believe that the risk to long-term business owners or, value investors, I actually call myself a business owner. I don't necessarily call myself a value investor because I like to hold these businesses forever. And the risk to us is that if brands participate in polarized marketing efforts, it adds risk to owning the brand as the Bud Light situation illuminated. And so the question is, how do I value that risk? I really can't. And so I would have to discount it, which means that the brand is worth a lot less than it's currently potentially trading at. And so this is why I believe that this impacts value investors, because as we model these companies out, if they're participating or they look like they're participating in a polarized marketing effort, we're gonna have to significantly discount it. And I would think that I would reduce their growth by half, but really, I really would just probably step away because I can't answer question number 2 in the questions that we ask when we are looking to invest in a business. And the question number 2 is, does this business have strong economics that will last in the long term? Well, if you're participating in sort of like polarized marketing efforts, how long until you make a misstep and you blow up your brand? Is that even possible? I don't know. It's company specific, but it's just not an area that I want to play in. And so overall, I believe that the Bud Light situation has exposed a real risk, and I believe that more attention will be paid by operational executives as well to what the advertising executives do. Previously those two groups have kind of been separated from each other, but I think there's going to be more of a sign off by the operational guys and maybe like the CEO on what the advertising execs do going forward. I think investors will likely also be more cautious and limit portfolio exposure to polarizing brands. But I want to know what you guys think. I really think that this is a very important issue that I was very shocked that not a lot of value investors were talking about this. I think this is a big deal, and it's probably the biggest deal in advertising that has happened since maybe like New Coke, I would think. There's definitely going to be case studies after case studies being made for all NBA programs all over the world as a result of this situation. But let me know what you guys think. Am I on base or am I not thinking about this properly? And so, also guys, I just want to say thank you very much for sticking by me while I was dealing with those long COVID effects. I really appreciate all the, get well soons and everything that I got from you guys. It was really kind. And so the other thing is I recently researched 63 banks, and I created sort of like a comps schedule, which you can actually get in the upper tier of the Patreon. And what the comp schedule gives you access to is essentially analyzing all 63 banks against 9 key performance metrics. And then I sort of determine which one is the right one for my portfolio. And you will also get access to a 2.5-hour video where I walk through the full analysis. And so you can get access to that at the upper tier of the Patreon. And so I'll leave it there and I'll see you guys later.